G'day, legends. I hope that you're having a fantastic day. So far, a fantastic weekend. I almost said a great Friday, but you're going to have to wait another 24 hours. Now, today we have a lot to go over. So if the number at the bottom of how long this video is long, I apologize in advance, but we have a lot to look at. So we're going to look at missiles. We need to look at maps and attacks and some drills. We'll look at the Ukrainian Minister of Foreign Affairs meeting up with the Chinese Minister of Foreign Affairs. What has actually been said by both Ministries of Foreign Affairs? We'll go through exactly what was said and a bit more of what could come then of this. We need to talk about Poland and an ultimatum they've given Ukraine for if they ever want to join the EU. We need to look at as well that Commander-in-Chief Syrskyi, what he has then said about Crimea and future Ukrainian actions. But in the very beginning of this video, what we're then going to look at is what I was sent across from one of my really trusted guys about what he sees and his opinion on the messaging change that we have seen from Kiev about negotiations, maybe opening dialogue and moving into then the rest of the year. So this is what he had sent across then here. Hey, Matty, I thought I'd briefly comment on Ukraine's perceived shift regarding negotiations with Russia. I agree with you. I think there's a clear shift, apparently mirrored by public opinion in Ukraine. But I don't believe it has much to do with Trump. He might be a factor, sure, but I doubt he's the main one. I think it mostly has to do with events on the front line. Ukrainian forces have been slowing down the Russians but are unable to stop them, even in areas that have been fortified for 10 years like Avdiivka, around Toretsk, and perhaps soon Ugledar. Today we're going to look at an attack in Ugledar, and the Toretsk front is what we call the New York front a lot. That's the last remaining part of 10-year border. If they cannot stop them there, where? Then the Russians likely don't have the manpower to seize major Ukrainian cities now, or perhaps ever, but they don't necessarily need to storm them if they can cut them off. Now, I would go even a bit further than that. I think Ukraine as a nation has given up on winning this war. This may sound outrageous, but here are two simple observations. A, Ukrainian forces need more men. That's been abundantly clear by just about everyone who matters in the Ukrainian government. We'll look at what Syrskyi says as well today too. B, the manpower hasn't come, and there's no sign of any large impeding mobilisation. So they recognise what they'd have to do to potentially win the war, but they're not doing it. You and I spoke about a few months ago that the mobilisations need to happen now. Even if guys have that minimum 12, 15 weeks of training, and I think that's a bare minimum, you can't do that all at once. It's going to take 12 months to prepare for a 2025 offensive if that takes place, and we haven't seen that mobilisation, nor have we seen massive amounts of men in Ukraine going and signing up to backfill then the volunteering there. And none of the NAFO guys on Twitter are also helping out with this either. Now, please don't get me wrong. I'm absolutely not blaming them for this. The sacrifices they've made so far have been immense, and the ones required to win would be far greater still, and very possibly still insufficient to succeed. I couldn't possibly blame them for refusing them. It's their blood, their country. Besides, it's not really as if a large assembly of Ukrainian citizens had gathered to make this decision. It's just sort of the outcome you get when you compute the internal balance of political forces within within the country. And I agree with what he's saying here, and I think this is coming together in this way. Now, it just continues on here. Given this, well, the only possible thing to hope for is to limit what Ukraine will have lost when the war does end. Unless, of course, something really major and unexpected happens and overturns everything. But failing that, Ukraine has to make some compromises of some sort. The problem is compounded by the fact that the country is almost 100% dependent on foreign assistance. And how much assistance can come or keep coming if Ukraine won't mobilise enough men to make use of it. If this isn't already happening, Western leaders will soon turn to Zelensky and ask, why should we make the necessary commitments for Ukraine if Ukraine won't make it for itself? Sure, for us, it's just money and stuff, while for you, it's blood. But it's money and stuff we actually need, and it's also your country, not hours. And I think he makes some important points. And I'm going to do a specific video on this, but I do feel like Zelensky is currently at an impossible crossroads. Crossroad 1 is we mobilize 500,000 men, of which we're going to lose tens or into the hundreds of thousands to have then assaults, offensive actions down into Donetsk, into Crimea, into Luhansk, into Kharkiv. It's going to be incredibly costly to do that. Crossroads B is you have a negotiation, but that of course goes back on all the messaging for the past 2.5 years of that we will achieve the 1991 borders. Now I believe Crossroads 3 here would be to make a change in then the Ukrainian constitution and then hold a vote at wartime. Now what I failed to say with number 1 of mobilizing 500,000 and knowing you're going to have a large loss there too, regardless of the victory, but then you still have your cards on the table. Now, while you're doing that gamble, yes, you may win the jackpot, but while your cards are on the table, the chance of you still losing is there. Now, that is the impossible crossroad, is for Ukraine to regain the 1991 borders, they still have to risk everything else as well. What do you think of what he has said here, my guy, and what do you think of what I am saying? I'm all open to change opinions, to look at things and to critical feedback as well. Now let's look at some missiles. As we know, there's been a number of strikes in Kharkiv and other areas in Ukraine. Now this has come out from Noel reports that shot down none of the Iskanders and missiles unknown and the majority of the Shaheeds. That said, this came out, well, I only saw it today in my research, but I got messaged last night at 10:36 Australia time, so just after 11 Sydney time, where the rest of Australia actually happens, that one of my guys on the ground has said, well, 5 Iskanders hit Kharkiv today so far, so significantly more than this number is saying. So again, I'll let you make up your mind on where then this sits. So let's have a look at maps and some footage and some assaults in here. Now, I uploaded my video about half an hour early last night, and I would have been then correct. So this is what we looked at then yesterday, if this will load, and I had said, look, looking at this, I believe that this gap in here of this then 300 meters, I believe, will have or will be closing up. Now, there's actually, you can see 1 of 2, then we come forward to the second of the second map, and look, we're seeing what I predicted in here. I'm not some genius. I'm just looking at the lay of the land. Now, if this is still, this should be grey zone. How is an area that between grey zone has 111 meters, and that's probably being generous, that is the amount of ground the guy missed the shot on Trump at. Regardless, this is grey. If this is grey, that's concerning. If there's any blue or green in here, even more concerning because they're not coming out of here. But I believe that this through here is red in here. That is my take on this piece in there. Otherwise, there is a envelopment and successful surround of troops here. So we'll wait and see what is specifically said in this area. Now, let's have this one first from Suryak and what he says in here. Only 2 localities remain under Ukrainian control east of the Volcha River in Osheretny-Avdiivka front, Skushny and Mezovy. So let's actually have a look at where these areas sit. So to find these 2 small towns, we have to zoom right in down here. This is Mazovy and this is Skusheny, very small areas just then above this Yazan-Borodivka front. And I do believe that we will see a fast close up of these open grounds at some point. Once it's in location and Ukraine choose to then have a withdrawal out of some of these sections. But then we'll have a look at then Avdiivka for the day and see what then Suryak maps is showing. So this is the road that runs through here. Now he is showing that this is Prohez around Yehevnivka, that this is closing up basically down towards Vovchi and to the east in here, showing fairly similar. Now, just to the north of here, this is this advancement here is Luzovsky. So let's have a look. Same sort of area, but again, he's showing that this is closed up, and I believe that that will have been closed up if you've got a 100-meter exit on open, flat ground. Now, Let's actually go down south. Now, this Uglada-Madiinka front in here, we have seen this creeping up over the past few weeks, of course, putting some lines of supply in danger. Now, I won't show you on this. I'll show you on the Telegram, but we can see a large then Russian assault here coming forward of a number of tanks, a number of vehicles, and then a number of these are taken out, and there is then a retreat here. Now, of course, because it's me, I have a differing opinion on this, although there was larger losses. So this was put out. This is insane. The 79th Air Assault Brigade repelled one of the largest Russian assaults from multiple directions. The attack involved 11 tanks and 45 infantry fighting vehicles and a BMT Terminator. A Terminator is a tank assault. It's like on a T-72 hull with machine guns. It's to help tanks in urban environments. Russia learnt the hard way from Grozny. 12 motorcycles and 200 personnel. Now, the footage does not show anywhere near that amount of guys, but it does say that they then lost 13 armoured vehicles. I believe 7 were tanks, and then Russians then retreated. Now, a few things I want to say in here. There does show that the morale and motivation and the ability to launch assaults is still there with the Russian forces. Yes, this wasn't successful. But what I will say is this is an attritional phase of war. Advances are going to look like this in attritional war, and they're going to be incredibly bloody. There's no four-dimensional chess, a little flank around here, cut. In large-scale attritional war, you're going to have incredibly costly assaults, some of which work and some of which don't work. Now, people pointing out the motorcycles, lighter vehicles in a mix with then heavily armoured vehicles does work. It is in NATO doctrine. It's obviously within Russian doctrine. It's in doctrine all around the world. Just because you think a motorcycle is a shitbox and blah, 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 that's not a military vehicle, motorcycles, scooters, electric bikes are becoming absolute mainstay on battlefields all around the world, from sniper units down the road from me through to special forces around the world. Motorcycles do work on the battlefield, and light infantry on light vehicles like this does work, combined then with armour as well. That's why we debust out of armour during the assault phase of the fight as well. I was mechanised infantry. I have some idea of what I am on about. But like I said, advances like this in attritional war are going to look like this. And one thing that I have spoken about with conversations with guys fighting for Ukraine is Russians' new willingness to actually have a withdrawal on the battle. That it does seem, at least from his opinion, that the higher command has given the commander on the ground the initiative to make the call of then a withdrawal, saving a lot of troops and ability to then fight again. And that's what he has seen more on the infantry, like, trench to trench fighting, but he said it has had then a big effect. Now, this is exactly what he said to me, and I'll link the video down below if I remember to. He talks specifically about that. He's going to come on the podcast once he's in a better location to do it. But he also said to me in this, I chewed up some guys on motorbikes. With a machine gun, no worries. That said, none of us would currently have the motivation or spirits to assault a trench line on dirt bikes. So who is speaking to the morale, motivation, spirit difference between then the opposing sides at the time as well. And I found that very interesting. Again, he rang me last night. I bloody missed a call, but he will be on and we will specifically talk about this. Now, we need to come up into Pishani, as this is an area that we have seen Russia confirmed by these maps across multiple different maps, then having advancements over the past few weeks. Of course, trying to get to Kolesnivka here, trying to cut the Ukrainian forces with the Oskil here into the north and south group. So you're focusing on less supplies at any then one time. Syriac has then an update in here showing that it's then only 6Ks to then the Oskil. Let's have a look. Maybe 9, depending where you went to, but still under 10 clicks. Russian army made new advances west of Pishani, and troops are now 6Ks from the Oskil River. In addition, new Russian advance between Berestove and Novoselivsky was made 1 week ago. So just down Berestove, Novoselivsky in here. These aren't shown, so we will wait and see. But he's also saying that there was then further advancement out from Pishani then overnight. Again, like with everything, we will wait and then see, but it's not too different. So look where this then V's out. This is, I believe, right in here. I could be wrong. So it's not too different. It may be a kilometre or more. We will wait and see what happens there. Now, coming up into the north, I'm waiting every day to see a change here, not then seeing it. But we have got some footage from the Russian side, I believe, of FABs being then dropped in Vovchansk, and you can just see the destruction power that these bombs then have. Where Ukraine is on then the offensive, it's the only part of the front where Ukraine is currently on the offensive is up in Vovchansk, and have halted then that Russian advancement there. You can see those FABs, and that city is basically now down in ruins. Now let's talk about China. Of course, Ukraine's Minister of Foreign Affairs, Dmitry Kuleba, has gone to China to meet with their Minister of Foreign Affairs, Wang Yi. Now, my take on China is similar to what the late Henry Kissinger said about America. He said, America has no permanent friends or enemies, only strategic interests. I believe China is the exact same now, as they have got far more powerful since he has said that. I wouldn't be trusting what China says from a bar of soap or any more than basically any other leader around the world anyway. But in my opinion, a strong NATO has no strategic interest to China and its strategic interests and strategy around the world, especially in what it sees as a coming unipolar world. And we will speak on more of this into the future. So let's look then at what Kuleba has said, what Zelensky has said, and then what the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of China has also said. Now, Kuleba on his Twitter said, today in China, I held a detailed and thorough negotiations with my Chinese counterpart Wang Yi about the path to peace. I emphasized that Ukraine needs a just and lasting peace and not just an illusion of peace. I appreciate that this position was reciprocated. So he is saying that China sees as well that it needs to be a lasting peace and not just an illusion of this peace. We agree that all forces must work together to find a common ground on the path to restoring true peace in accordance with the principles of the UN Charter. UN Charter, of course, then has the territorial integrity, sovereignty within this. We also discussed the bilateral agenda. Thanks, Mr. Yi, for his hospitality and extended invitation to visit Ukraine. So we will maybe see then the Minister of Foreign Affairs then visit Ukraine. So furthermore, this is from Ukraine's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Kuleba has said, I'm convinced that a just peace in Ukraine is in China's strategic interests, and China's role as global force for peace is important. I think a just peace in Ukraine is in China's strategic interests, but I don't think a stronger or expanded NATO is in China's strategic interest, or a weakened Russia, one of its closer allies. Of course, with all of then the different economic alliances that China and Russia and countries within its sphere of influence are then in. The minister briefed his colleague on the results of the peace summit in Switzerland and explained the logic of further steps in implementing the peace formula. Of course, Zelensky has his own 10-point peace formula, and then, of course, China has their own then 6-point peace formula spoken about in Brazil. We also need to look over where then these overlap. But of course, China did not attend in Switzerland because they said if Russia wasn't there, that is the minimum standard for them to attend. He restated Ukraine's established position that it is ready to engage the Russian side in the negotiation process at a certain stage, when Russia is ready to negotiate in good faith, but emphasised that no such readiness is currently observed on the Russian side. But is the stage that Russia have a withdrawal from all Ukrainian ground? That is not going to happen other than military victories by Ukraine in the war. Why would Russia at this point withdraw from areas if there wasn't military victories? That is the realistic question asked. Now, it might be nice to have, they could pull back. Why would they at then this point in time? That links into what we spoke about right in the beginning. Either way, I guess we will see, because Ukraine want Russia later in the year to be at the next peace summit. Now, Dmitry Kuleba said the European Union decision is irreversible. We'll see on this. I propose to discuss our bilateral relations today, in particular through the prism of Ukraine's future membership in the EU and China's relations with Europe. The Ukraine foreign minister emphasized that Russian aggression is not only an obstacle to Ukraine's development, but it also hinders international stability, the development of good neighbourly relations, and in particular development of trade between China and Europe. Of course, trade between China and Europe is then incredibly important, but international stability, and as we've gone over in other videos, can definitely help both Russia and China in the developing unipolar world and where they see their worldview as well, not 4, not 10, maybe a decade, maybe a century, down then the line. Now, this is then what Zelensky has said. The Minister of Foreign Affairs, who's visiting China these days, held talks with his counterpart. This is the first visit of a Ukrainian official at this level in many years, I think about 12. There is a clear signal that China supports Ukraine's territorial integrity and sovereignty. From what I've seen, this isn't super clear. It supports the UN Charter, but I'm not 100% sure. Anyway, it was also confirmed, Chinese leader Xi Jinping told me, that China will not supply weapons to Russia. Okay. It may not supply weapons to Russia, but could China supply components that, it's chips. I don't fucking know. Could those then go into weapons? It's a lathe. It creates barrels. See the workaround here? Or China, are they open to Russia purchasing weapons? We know Russia still has a hell of a lot of money and industrial capacity. Could they be buying stuff to create weapons or buying weapons? That, China may not supply weapons to them, but could they, through exchange of this thing called money, do that? I don't know. It's one of the questions, I guess, to be asked. But let's look at then what China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs then has said about this. You can find this on their website if you'd like. Wang Yi said that China and Ukraine are friendly countries to each other, and what has been accumulated in the course of exchanges between the two sides is friendship and cooperation. Ukraine is one of the first countries to support and participate in the joint construction of the Belt and Road. This is a threat to the dominance of the Western world, the Belt and Road Initiative. We will talk about these in the future. Yesterday's video, we spoke a little bit about it. In recent years, China has been Ukraine's largest trading partner and the largest exporter of agricultural products. Wang Yi pointed out that Ukrainian crisis enters its third year and the conflict is still ongoing with the risk of escalation and spillover. China has always been firmly committed to promoting a political solution to the crisis. President Xi Jinping proposed 4 shoulds, which provide important guidelines for this. On the basis, China and Brazil, we'll talk specifically on this, joint issued the 6-point consensus covering the 3 principles, which gathered the greatest common denominator of the international community and received widespread response and support. So we'll talk about these 3 elements: the humanitarian protection, nuclear protection, and supply chain. This is where Zelensky's peace plan, the Chinese peace plan, of course, then have that Venn diagram overlap. China believes the resolution to all conflicts must eventually return to the negotiating table. The resolution of all disputes must always be achieved through political means. Recently, both Ukraine and Russia have sent signals of willingness to negotiate to varying degrees. Although the conditions and timing are not yet right, we support all efforts conducive to peace and are willing to continue to play a constructive role in ceasefire and resumption of cease talks. I'll talk about then the humanitarian situation. So this is where then Chinese 6-point plan is with then when they were talking with Brazil. That number 1, namely no expansion on the battlefield, no escalation of fighting, no provocation by any party. So bang, where it is then today. The two sides believe that dialogue and negotiation is the only viable solution to the Ukrainian crisis. So talks, stop the war, then start talking. Number 3 here is civilians, including women and children, POWs, must be protected. That is overlap with then Ukraine's. The use of weapons of mass destruction, nuclear, chem, bio weapons must be opposed. Of course, overlap in this. Attacks on nuclear power plants, nuclear facilities must be opposed. This is number 5 in theirs, number 1 in Ukraine's, but doesn't specifically and either just talk about energy around the world. We've spoken about why that may be. 6, dividing the world into isolated political and economic groups should be opposed. So you're dividing the world. If you divide it into EU, and then Global South, all these other EA, EU, and all these should be opposed, not just isolating countries, as China has called out the UN before for weaponizing sanctions against countries, including itself and Russia. Now, continue on what China has said here. Ukraine supports China's position on the Taiwan issue and will continue to adhere to the one China principle. I'd like to see what America think exactly of that and what would happen if and when then China have a launch onto Taiwan. Ukraine attaches importance to China's opinions and has carefully studied the 6-point consensus reached by China and Brazil, like we just spoke about. Ukraine is willing and ready to engage in dialogue and negotiations with Russia. Of course, negotiations should be rational and substantive, aiming to achieve a just and lasting peace. So taking into account the reality of what is happening on the ground and actually come to some level of conclusion at then the end. Now, what we need to talk about is the Volyn massacre. That was carried out by Ukrainian nationalists, of course, led by Stefan Bandera. Now, this others, even other people like the legit Nazi that was celebrated in then the Canadian Parliament, is being used in this way. The countries glorify activities of those who fought against the Soviets and turn them into national heroes, even if these individuals actively collaborated with Nazis in annihilating Jews during the Holocaust. So just because someone fought against the side of which you don't like doesn't mean that they may be a good guy. The Nazis did, of course, horrible, disgusting things against humanity. So did the Japanese, so did the Soviets, so did fucking we, if you look at through the war crimes and dropping bombs on cities. But of what the Nazis did in the carrying out of extermination of people is disgusting. And just because they fought against someone you don't like or continue to not like doesn't then mean they should be held in regards and or a hero. Now, the reason we talk about the Volyn massacre today is Poland has given an ultimatum to Ukraine. Polish defense minister, I won't try and pronounce it, sorry bro, believes that Ukraine cannot join the EU without resolving the Volyn tragedy. It said Poland supports Ukraine as much as possible. They're one of the biggest supporters to Ukraine, of course, with the amount of refugees that Poland took in is massive. Any other country is dwarfed. However, he added that not everything is perfect in the relation between these countries due to unresolved historical issues. He believes that real politics should set an ultimatum. Ukraine cannot join the EU without resolving the Volyn tragedy issues. Now, what actually then is this? And we'll look over some of the worship of some of these people too. This is from the Polish Prime Minister. The President. This is a very sad date for many Polish who lost their close ones during that time. Their number is estimated at 100,000. So that was killed between two areas, but overall the tragedy is 100,000, the majority of which is the minority Poles and some Ukrainian and Polish in this as well. The events of Volhyna in 1940s are not a war between Poland and Ukraine, but purely ethnic cleansing. That is what we call it today. The point was to remove Poles from these territories. Adding the massacre was ordered by the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, the OUN, and carried out by the UPA, the Ukrainian Insurgent Army. We'll talk more then about this and who some of these guys were. So, continue to look. Guys like Stefan Bandera are still worshipped in groups in Ukraine as well. Is it the majority? No. If you go to Ukraine and pass through some of the checkpoints, will you see patches and or flags of Bandera? Yes, you will as well. Let's be honest and open about this. Will you see Nazi shit in Russian units as well? Yeah, you will too. Will you see hammer and sickles? Yeah, you also will. But like we spoke about, both sides can be fucking wrong in something. Now, this, of course, is Valery Zaluzhny, who was the commander-in-chief of the armed forces and now is Ukraine's diplomat then in the UK. But we have this, that Bandera and this Shokiev, who's an evil bastard too, had both photos on his wall, prominently hanging on the wall in his office, as well as with busts of Bandera as well. So obviously means something to himself here. And why I'm bringing this up is it shows that there is, within the forces, definitely I don't want to say worshipping, but this is systemic. There is people, who are holding these figures to then a higher standard, who have done horrible shit. Yes, they fought against the Soviets, but they also did horrible things. And this is where you can't just discount something due to what is happening then today. Now, who is the second bloke we see on the wall in here? Commanded this battalion of volunteer unit operating under the organization, the OUN, as a subunit commanded by the German Special Operations Unit. In order, he was an actual Nazi. His dominated military formation, served in the German uniform, and soldiers participated in the brutal Lviv program in 1942. He commanded this battalion, a Ukrainian auxiliary police unit under Heinrich Himmler, one of the most evil bastards to ever live under the SS. The police here, which carried out brutal pacification of operations in Belarus from 1943 after defecting from German service. He's served as Supreme Commander in the Ukrainian Insurgent Army, so the UPA, the second unit of which we speak about then before, which carried out the systemic massacres of Polish and Jewish populations. So the EU has definitely put an ultimatum there. We can see even to the highest ranks that how is this ultimatum then going to look as well? Of course, Zelensky has posted before then tributes for those who were lost and killed, massacred in those as well. And this is something I see so many people doing, is like dick measuring contests between what the Soviets did, what the Nazis did, what the Japanese did. Why can't we just say everyone did horrific shit, and putting your identity behind any of these, you wear the horrific shit they did. Oh, but such and such killed 3,000 here and then they killed 30,000 over here. That doesn't then mean that 3,000 doesn't matter. That it's just ridiculous as well. And I think especially the dropping the nuclear weapons as well needs to, we need to see to that exactly how it was too on civilian areas. People did horrific shit led by horrific men. Let's be fucking realistic about it. Anyway, let's talk then about we talked about Zaluzny, the commander-in-chief, who of course was sacked by Zelensky. Let's have a look at the new commander-in-chief, of course, Syrsky, who has come in and he has said some interesting things about potential futures and the retaking of Crimea to the Guardian. So we'll go over this. This may be a little bit long, but the Russians are fighting, better resource. They have more of everything. Tanks, IFVs, soldiers. The original 100,000 strong invasion force has grown to 520,000. This is where people point at this 100,000. I think Russia didn't expect the resistance. I think they sent in an occupation force, not an invasion force. That 100,000 was never enough to carry out the invasion that they thought they were going to, I believe, have. I think they thought it was going to be like in 2014, hit much harder resistance, had huge losses, of course, now grown to over 500,000. With a goal by the end of 24 to 690,000 men, so growing a hell of a lot. When it comes to equipment, there is a ratio of 1 to 2, 1 to 3 in their favour. Since 22, the number of Russian tanks has doubled. Artillery systems has tripled. Armoured personnel carriers, so APCs, gone from 4,500 to 8,900. The enemy has a significant advantage in force and resources. Therefore, for us, the issue of supply and the issue of quality is really at the forefront. The man-to-machines priority that explains recent events on the battlefield. Since last autumn, Ukraine's armed forces have been going steadily backwards. I believe the quality is one thing, but I think quantity is a whole other thing. In a war of attrition like this, quantity really matters. Just how many shells, how many men, how many tanks, and also not only the amount you have, the amount of which you're willing to lose as well. I saw a comment yesterday asking about where are the Leopards, where are the Challengers, where are the Abrams? Now, I believe those systems, yes, they may be better than other systems, but the propaganda victory of Russia getting one of those or killing one of those is more than the tactical victories that weapon system may have. Does that make sense? And I believe that's why we're not then seeing them used and or getting refitted to see if there is an offensive down the line. Now, Syrsky admitted things are very difficult. The Russian aggressor attacks our positions in many directions. Could Russia's advance be halted? Yes, of course. First of all, it depends on on our brave soldiers and officers. By example, he cited Russia's latest attempt to seize Kharkiv and the neighbouring province of Sumy. It failed. Now, we're up in this area. With the troops that we saw around Sumy and Kharkiv, there was never enough to have a legit attempt to take Kharkiv and Sumy. He talks on it here more. Putin's so-called security corridor. So it may have been enough to push back 10 Ks in some directions, but that was never enough to actually have a real push on Sumy and or Kharkiv. Now, continuing. Syrsky sought to put recent setbacks in context. He described Russia's creeping victories as tactical ones, so not strategic operational breakthroughs. But there has been a lot, especially with areas like Avdiivka, such as the capture of a major city, that this hasn't taken place. In principle, the enemy has not made any significant progress. Now, I would disagree with this. If this was Ukraine making this amount of ground day on day, month on month, week on week, we would see it as significant progress. Russia's successes, meanwhile, came at a staggering human cost. The Kremlin's casualties were 3 times higher than Ukraine's and even more in certain directions. Now, of course, we have seen the numbers. The numbers of killed is much bigger. In February, Volodymyr Zelensky told us 31,000. When asking about this, he declined and said that they were sensitive. But even at 3 times, can Russia maintain that as well? That is one of the questions of which will be answered, I guess, at the end of this war. Syrskyi contrasted his battlefield tactics with those who used by Russian commanders, who were known for sacrificing huge numbers of infantry troops to gain 100 or 200 meters. It's very important to us to save the lives of soldiers. We don't defend ruins to death. I think those in Avdiivka, in Krinky, would disagree. He said he was not willing to achieve goals at any cost or to chuck his men into futile meat assaults. Sometimes it's necessary to move to more favourable positions, so moving back. We've spoken that this is probably at this point the best tactic for Ukraine is to have that like fighting withdrawal, move back, get time, stretch out the Russians, have your mobilisation, get more weapons in before you launch anything. Don't hold just one line to the death, ruins to death. Keep that moving then rearwards and lead the Russians into where you would want to fight while trying to get more time for yourself. That said, in attritional artillery, drone, armoured warfare, trench warfare now, you are going to sacrifice huge numbers doing bloody anything. Look at that attack we spoke about with the Russians in the beginning. How else can ground be made in an area like this? I don't know. It beats me in my tactical or strategic knowledge. Amid skepticism about Ukraine's prospect of achieving outright victory, he noted various developments of F-16s would strengthen air defence. But however, he said that there were limits on F-16s might achieve. They had to remain 40 k's or more from the front line because of the risk Moscow would shoot them down. So they're going to have to remain well back from even then occupied territories too. So they're still going to be a long way back. And what I think is we'll see them used around maybe Kherson, Crimea, at least in the beginning, maybe over areas of intercepting crews, but out in these like northeastern area where Russia, they've sort of big time falling into where Russia have borders, I believe will be a lot more in danger and may not be used up here as much, if at all, depending on the power of AWACS and the ability to strike, conduct seed and deed missions, so suppression, destruction of air defences. The Kremlin, he added, has been forced to completely pull out from the Crimean port of Sevastopol. A key Ukrainian objective is to destroy the Kerch bridge and rail crossing. He declined to say when this might happen. Early attempts to truck bomb and a drone strike, one put a hole in it, one did some damage but was then repaired. We know a lot of ships have pulled out of the Black Sea, even maybe pulling out of the Sea of Azov. How much hindrance has this actually had on stopping missiles falling into Ukraine? Not that much, really. But it has shown that these cheap drone boat bloody things can have a huge effect on highly sophisticated navies. Exactly like we're seeing the H guys down in Yemen using drones as well. It can bring a navy to its knees. He said Kyiv had a plan to get back Crimea more than a decade after Putin illegally annexed it. Was this really feasible? He says it's realistic, of course, but it's a big military secret. We will do everything we can to reach the internationally recognised borders of 91. We have to win to liberate our citizens who are in the occupied territories who are suffering. So this in here, of course, so yeah, there is, he says, realistic to recapture Crimea and get back those borders. I don't know what the plan would be. I think about this every single night for hours about what you could do in Crimea. The best plan I'd heard from guys was a reverse Dunkirk, that you have to secure everywhere else first, every boat, every ship, everything, knowing you're going to take huge losses, because coming through then these two areas, I just don't see if that's realistic, even with these bridges down. I think Russia know this, that it's probably going to be cut off at some point and we'll have massive caches of food and water and ammo and men across in here. I don't know how militarily this is going to get done. And I think, like we spoke about in the beginning of that option A crossroad for Zelensky, I think regardless of victory for Ukraine in other areas, could it all fall apart on an attempt on Crimea, that they may take back areas and then lose everything due to how defensible Crimea is. It is insanely defensible. The drone boats are going to do nothing against then land in here too. So I don't know. He says there's a plan. He's much more knowledgeable and has far more intel than I do. I can't come up with a way. Let me know. One of Syrskyi's most pressing challenges is to find new recruits to replace Ukrainian soldiers who have been killed or injured. That Many have come to recruitment centres, many have done so, and others are hiding. Of course, they dropped the conscription age. This is exactly what we spoke about in the beginning. He said that without mobilisation, he could not create new reserves and brigades, which were needed as Russia multiplied its own land forces. It's very important to us that all citizens of Ukraine fulfil their constitutional duty. You mean all men of Ukraine, because they're the ones by then this mobilisation. And I'm somewhat incorrect on that. There's also women who have specific qualifications who can't either. So I apologise for leaving that out. I'm not trying to be an arsehole. But again, my take on this is mobilisation needed to be done months ago. Anyway, he urged Ukrainians living outside the country to take part as well, saying, I hope that after victory, they will be able to tell their children where they were. Where were you when all citizens of Ukraine were fighting in such fierce battles? That is the question. So appealing to guys of if their grandchildren or their children ask your dad, where were you during the war in Ukraine? And you say I was chilling out in Germany or hiding in Kyiv, putting on that as well a bit of, I guess, a guilt or how you want to be seen in the future here. Regardless, we will see about mobilisation. I say, oh my God, I can't talk. I've added like 10 syllables. We will see about mobilisation. We'll see about future attacks. We'll see about negotiations. But in my opinion, in the last fortnight, the messaging has changed dramatically. It'll be very interesting to see what Ukraine bring to the table if Ukraine's holding this summit later this year and inviting Russia, it is up to Ukraine to bring something to the table. And if Russia don't believe something realistic will be brought there, why would they attend? Therefore, China will not then attend, and other countries as well. Anyway, legends, apologise, this is a longer one, but thank God I got some sleep and I'm feeling then a lot better. Look after yourselves, have a great day, and I'll speak to you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.